Right.
Yeah. So while you're getting that ready, I'll explain what we're looking at here. So I've been just tracking some of the the mock drafts that some of the 2 round mock drafts, two rounds or more mock drafts that have just charting them and seeing who the consent where the pros are kind of gauging where these guys are going to go. So this chart here, and it goes what 1 to 40.
41. Xavier Worthy
Yeah,
is the bottom
yeah.
guy.
So there's 41 players who on all 5 of these mock drafts were taken in round 1 or 2. So just kind of took the average on where to talk about today. Just figured out the average on what the consensus is where the pros think they're landed, right? So, and that'll give you a gauge. Obviously, it's pre-free agency. A lot of this is going to change, but it kind of gives you a gauge on who's going to around the soft spot, the comfortable spots on where people are going to go. So, again, to my point, a lot of these guys had Olufoshanu fall into 10. 1, 2, 3 of them, I think, right? 2 of them had him fall into 10. 3 of them did, and then 2 of them had him going before. So it skews it a little bit. Maybe if he took the high and the low, he'd probably fall around the 10. But we talk about trading down. Well, what's a comfortable spot to trade down? If it's not Olufoshanu and if it's not Joe Alt, who is the target, right? We know that the Jets supposedly are very high on Talisi Fuanga, right? Well, doesn't look like he's going to get much past, pick 16 here if you take the average of what these pros are saying. So that's probably, if you want to trade down, you're only going to trade back a couple spots, and you're probably not going to accumulate a lot of draft capital in the trade back if Talisi Fuaga is still your target. Now, if you want to go down to some of the other guys, you might be able to go a little further, right? Whether it's
I don't
Jason
think
Latham,
I'd want to go. I was going to say, I don't think I want to go below like the Raiders at 13. The Raiders to me feel like Funga's floor to me. I don't see him getting past 13 with how highly regarded he's been since the Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
What I find interesting, as I'm like going through it, starting at the top, Caleb Williams, but then going down to Drake May, do you see Chad Reuter has him at number 4? Do you know if that was a trade down to get him, or was like he thinks the Cardinals are going to take a quarterback there?
Hang on 1 second. Let me pull up the other spreadsheet here, the raw data. No. Yeah, there must have been a trade of some sort that Chad Reuter on, because he did not have the Cardinals taking a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
So he probably had somebody trading up there. I didn't note that, and I didn't write it down in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and then I see the 2.6 average draft position for both May and Daniels, so you can kind of see those guys flip-flop between 2 and 3. And I'd imagine Marvin Harrison Jr. is the one that's sliding up a little bit. Like, oh yeah, okay, so Marvin Harrison Jr. goes number 3 in his draft.
Yeah, he had the Patriots taking Marvin Harrison Jr. and then somebody trading up. I forgot who it was.
I can see the Patriots do that.
Oh, absolutely. There's a big buzz going around, guys, that the Patriots might either A, stick and pick Marvin Harrison, or B, be open to business to be willing to move down. Because if you think about it, that team is not a quarterback away from competing. So they might look, I mean, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't probably pass on, but just say they have Williams and May, on a tier alone, and they're not too high on Jaden Daniels. Well, maybe they decide, you know what, we'll just hold off. We'll get a bridge guy in here, and we'll take another developmental quarterback later. A Penix in the second round, or a Bo Nix, or something like that later on, and then worry about the quarterback next year again, because they're not a quarterback away from winning. So they have they're starting a rebuild there, and they I don't know if pulling in a quarterback that's going to be behind a porous offensive line with no weapons and a defense that's going to be totally rebuilt is really the best way to handle the rebuild. Unless they're high on Jaden Daniels or Drake May, whoever their consensus is. I could see them easily sticking and picking Marvin Harrison, or maybe being open for business to trade back.
Yeah, and then when I go down a little bit further, I'm looking at Joe Alt. They don't have him getting any further than 7, which is the Titans pick. I feel like that's probably where most of us feel like he's going to go.
Yep.
Then you got Malik Neighbors. One scout has him falling down to 12, which I don't think I like Chad Router's rankings on a lot of stuff. He seems to be all over the place on these guys. But then you go over to, Odunze slipping past the Jets at 14. But I wanted to kind of key in on Brock Bowers because there's three people. Three people have him at number 5 to the Chargers. One has him to the Jets at 10. And then 1 to 15 in the Colts.
Yeah.
Are those kind of the three teams you would pencil in as like where you could see Bowers going?
Yeah, I think the variance for Bowers is probably the largest of all these top tier guys that we're talking about. He could go as high as 5. He could go as low as the 20s, right? I shouldn't say that. I think the absolute bottom for him is probably Cincinnati at 18. But 5 to 18 is the range where you could see Bowers be plucked off. I'll tell you, although I love Bowers and I'm a big fan of him, I just don't see an avenue that makes sense for the Jets to take him at 10 if the tackle room isn't resolved, right? You would have to tell me that we traded for a left tackle somehow, some way, who's going to be good there, and we brought, we spent the bag and brought in a free agent right tackle for me to be, kind of shift in focus and saying, well, maybe Brock Bowers does make sense. But listen, this draft, if anything, Joe Douglas has taught us over the past 3 years is that he beats to his own drum and his own draft board, and never say never. They talked about whether you believe it or not, whether it was staged for One Jets Drive, the show or whatnot. But if there was any truth to that draft board, Jamar Gibbs and Michael Mayer were both on it. And those are two positions last year that no one thought about, right? Forget about Will McDonald. Well, obviously, Will McDonald was on there. But, if they had Michael Mayer as number 3 on the board at the time, who's to say they wouldn't want to trade a guy who's probably 3 times the prospect that Michael Mayer, or, talk about 3 times the prospect of Michael Mayer. I can't see it. I just can't see it unless you told me that, we secured a left and a right tackle through trade or free agency. Then I'll have that conversation.
Yeah, I don't know if I could find it in me to go Bowers at this point. Just sort of looking at the tackle board. Like for me, Alt, Fashanu, Fuaga are the 3 that I'm like, okay, definitely. And then honestly, if all 3 were gone, I'd be fine with Latham. But then you're also talking about a situation where you have one of Neighbors or Odunze possibly there. And then you have to maybe split some hairs and say, okay, well, is one of those 2 guys better than offensive tackle number 4 in the doomsday sort of situation? Is there any way you would go with a wide receiver at 10, or are you kind of, really gearing up for offensive line?
If Neighbors is at 10, I would take Neighbors and figure it out, because I think he's a very, very special talent. I happen to be very, very high on him. I have him very high on my overall board. He's the only, him and Marvin Harrison are, put it this way, in this top 10 here, this consensus top 10, Marvin Harrison or Malik Neighbors would be the only 2 that I would even entertain with our limited draft capital figuring out how to trade up for. I'm not to say that I think Joe Douglas will do it, but those 2 guys are the 2 guys that I would go up to get. I wouldn't go up to get Alt. I wouldn't go up to get Fashanu. I wouldn't go up to get, a Brock Bowers or a Roma Dunze or anything like that. I just think that the gap between, even in a loaded wide receiver class, I think the gap between Marvin Harrison, Neighbors, and the next tier is huge. Is huge.
So I'm just looking real quick. The Jets are sitting at number 10 right now. A second-round pick is roughly 300 points. 270 is the lowest second-round pick, so we'll call it 300 points. If the Jets were to go back 300 points, you'd be looking at pick 16 would be equivalent to roughly a late third-round pick. So between, let's say the Jets were able to trade back between 16 and 22. Just
okay.
No rationale to that, just speculation wise, or conversation based. If we're somewhere between 16 and 22, when we start looking at this board, 16 you got J.C. Latham, and then as you go down, it's like Tyler Guyton and Amarius Mims is sitting at 26. Those are the types of tackles that you're talking about once you, decide to go back. And I don't know if Latham makes it that far. I think there's more offensive tackle needy teams like the Raiders, like the Saints, and then obviously the Jets could go after one as well. Like, how far back do you feel comfortable moving?
Well, listen, I'll say this, and to the chat and anyone who like, I'm 1,000% comfortable. I'll say this before I answer the question. I'm 1,000% comfortable sticking at 10, and if Latham's the choice, absolutely, he's my OT3 in the class. I'm also 100% if they chose to stick and pick and it was Fuaga, I'm completely fine with that as well. But to that question, like guys like Latham, guys like Mims, I think can offer. I think Latham's plug and play starter on the right side, no questions asked. I think Mims could be. And then you got Tyler Guyton, who I don't think he's gonna. Right here he's on the board at 22. Consensus. I think you're gonna see come after the combine, he's gonna shoot right up. Like so is Mims as well, because Mims is super athletic. I think those are two guys that are gonna kind of push up the board, and you can see him in the top half of the first round.